Hey guys, welcome to chapter 34, post-war blues. A lot of things are going on in the world that are really kind of a downer, and we're going to take a look at some of those here today. So let's get this party started. Chapter 34, called Age of Anxiety. Let's see what that's all about. So first thing, if you got your notes up, you can go ahead and do this. Have it ready for go for when we do this in class. I don't have my plan out, but you know what day it goes. So go ahead and click on that and drop your sticky note on the old Jamboard. Don't forget to put your initials on it. So here's your big questions for this one. Attitude of most people during post-war nations. These nations are at war. What's going on? What are people thinking? What's life like for people that were affected by this war? And we're going to see how economic collapses and a lot of bad things all happened at the same time, causing what we refer to as the Great Depression. Um, then we're going to see some new political ideologies pop up. We're going to see the rise of communism, the rise of fascism, the rise of a couple military dictatorships, and we're going to see, how that all played out in the years to come. And then we're going to see a massive anti-Semitic movement, especially across Europe, and why that was brewing, and what was the result of that. So let's take a look. In the United States, especially after the war, this is the biggest war America's ever been involved in. A lot of people died, um, including a couple 100,000 Americans. And Gertrude Stein was a writer. She wrote about this in a book called The Lost Generation. She referred to it as Lost Generation. Just a lot of soldiers coming back, and people just can't figure out why. It costs so much, and we spent so much, and we went to fight in this war, and just the horrible loss of life and destruction. People are just, how can this happen? And what are we going to do about it? And the attitude for most Americans was they just wanted to get past it and move on. And so a lot of these writers, being so fed up with the lack of interest in America, a lot of these writers actually moved to Europe to do a lot of their writing. And there was just a lot of pessimism and just disillusionment. But we got some new things going on. Albert Einstein's doing his thing. We got theory of special relativity. Your E equals mc squared, and your Heisenberg principle. A lot of new ideas in physics and chemistry, things like that. Think of that as like humanism 3.0. We kind of get through a lot of different ideas, and now we're taking it to the next level. In psychology, you got Sigmund Freud, Austrian psychologist, kind of the father of modern psychoanalysis, and his different approach to really starting to solve problems, for individuals with their emotions and their whole psyche, etc. Wrote a lot of books, and some of his theories and ideas have been kind of discounted, but there's still a lot of people that say there's a lot of merit to it. In art, we see through the war, we see a lot of artists using that as their like their inspiration for different pieces of art, etc. And a little bit of retreat to abstraction, like Pablo Picasso. I'm not quite sure, how he came up with the lot of stuff that he did, but it wasn't typical. I mean, you go from the Impressionist era where people are drawing, people having coffee next to the stream with flowers in the background and everybody smiling and happy to, people with, cube looking heads with eyes on both sides of their face. It's just kind of whatever. But that's kind of the way things were going. And you have this disappearance of distinction between what's good and bad art because it's all in the appreciation of it, and that's the way it should be. What's art to some people is junk to somebody else, and vice versa. So Great Depression. What we're going to see is a lot of money borrowed by Austria and Germany to pay back their reparation debts to France and England, and they're not paying it off very well. And they are also depending on those payments to pay debts owed to the United States. So the United States is borrowing money to Austria and Germany so they can pay it to England and France so they can pay off their debt here. Uh, so that's kind of what's going on. And so it all kind of depends on cash flow from the United States. However, when Germany and Austria stopped paying those big investors from the United States who were funding a lot of these banks, they quit borrowing more money to these people because they're not getting it back because France can't pay their debts because Austria and Germany aren't paying their debts, and it became kind of a vicious cycle. Here is Picasso's Guernica. That I guess should have been a slide above, but whatever. During the Spanish Civil War, this art piece is a giant mural in that city that was a scene of a pretty heavy loss of life during the Spanish Civil War. Some new technologies during the Great Depression. A lot of countries really suffered, especially if they were single export countries, and due to new technologies in developed world, what you have is people recycling rubber instead of getting new stuff and just throwing the tires in a landfill. Now you can take those and chop them up and melt them down and make new tires out of it. And you start to recycle some of that stuff, and you can reclaim a lot of it. Well, what's going to happen to the economies of the primary sources is they're going to decline dramatically, especially their economies are going to suffer tremendously if they're a single export country. Sorry, excuse me. Because of these new technologies and things like that. So what we see is a lot of these places like Malaysia and Sri Lanka. They used to call it Ceylon. The Dutch East Indies, we call today Indonesia. Their economies are really going to suffer when the demand for raw materials are going to drop tremendously. What we see all the way through World War I is that the government was buying all kinds of food products, and the prices stayed high, and farmers are doing great. And new technologies are getting farmers to farm more than they ever did, and now the government's buying it all. But when the war's over, the government stops buying, and the production doesn't stop. Unfortunately, these farmers still want to cash in. So if you got too much supply and not enough demand, the price is going to go down tremendously. And so all the way through the 20s, a lot of farmers are struggling because the prices are so low. The government actually started programs to pay farmers not to grow anything. They would pay them just to artificially keep the price of some of these, especially grain products, a little bit higher. And they got a lot of surplus, and the rest of the world doesn't need it as much. And then in 1929, in October of 29, started on Thursday the 24th, but the biggest hit was on Tuesday the 29th. What we see is a lot of people throughout the 20s had invested in the stock market. And when they did, a lot of people started making money. They took their savings, did whatever, and bought some stocks. Well, they wanted more stocks because it was almost a sure thing. And so they started investing more by taking out loans. So they would take out a loan for, say, $5,000 and buy some more stocks. Well, what do they have as collateral for that loan? You need to put something up. So if you don't pay back your loan, the bank gets something that's worth $5,000. Well, and if they haven't, if they don't have a car, certainly not worth $5,000, and maybe a house, I don't know. But the only thing they got worth $5,000 is the stock certificate that they bought the first time. And so they use the stock certificate as collateral to get a loan for the second set of stocks. Well, then they do that again, take out another loan, use the second set to get collateral for the next one. Well, what happens if the value of the first one goes down? What if it drops to $4,000? Now the bank only has $4,000 worth of collateral for a $5,000 loan, and the bank wants their $1,000, and you don't have it. And the bank's willing, and ready to foreclose on you and take everything if you don't pay off your loan, because you don't have $5,000 worth of collateral now. You only got four, and so they want $1,000. Well, what's the only thing you got that you can sell immediately to get $1,000 is a bunch of stocks. But if everybody's doing that at the same time, now everybody's selling, nobody's buying. What happens to the value of the stocks across the board? Start to shrink and shrink and shrink. Nobody's buying, everybody's selling, and next thing you know, we have a complete collapse. And the stock certificates are worthless. The banks go out of business, and all those loans just disappear, and everybody's bankrupt because they lost everything, lost all their savings. They put up their car, their house, everything, and now the banks got it. And what do you do with it? And a lot of people lost a whole lot of money in the process. Economic contraction, we start to see during this Great Depression, we see a lot of inventory surplus, right? These businesses didn't just stop producing overnight, right? But it didn't take long for them to start building up surpluses of a lot of these goods. If they weren't invested in the stock market or whatever, they can keep businesses rolling. But now all of a sudden you got too much and people aren't buying. And now you got to slow down production and you got to lay people off. And now those people are out of jobs, et cetera. So now what we see is massive unemployment. We see industrial production half of 1929 levels simply because there's nobody buying. So many people lost what they had. 44% of banks are out of business. What happens when people come in and say, "Hey, I got $2,000 in a safety deposit. I want my cash. I go to the bank and I want my money." Well, the bank can maybe pay you off, but the banks don't keep all those deposits on hand. They take that money and they invest it. They invest it here, invest it there, and they loan it out to other people. They don't have everybody's cash on hand, right? So 50 people are in line, all want their $2,000. The bank doesn't have it. And then all of a sudden they flip the sign and say, "We're closed." And if people want their money and people aren't paying off their loans, and now the bank has to pay people who have deposits in the bank, and the bank goes out of business. And it's lights out for those banks. And now everybody who had their safety deposits, their deposits, cash and life savings in that bank is now gone. And they never get it back because it just evaporates, gone. And so we start to see the ripple effects all around the world. A lot of hard hit countries who are dependent on the exported goods, especially Japan. Japan makes a lot of exported goods, but really, especially, is those single export countries where people just aren't buying their stuff anymore. And if you're dependent on one product that the world is buying and the world stops buying it, your economy is really, really going to suffer tremendously if you can't sell those products. The United States does a U.S. planned scarcity where they basically try to artificially lower the production rate of a lot of these products, just simply to try to salvage the prices for the farmers that are still left in business. And a lot of farmers, especially through the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, parts of New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas, through a drought in that part of the country, all end up moving out west to try to look for jobs because the farms are just completely destroyed because of a drought. And John Steinbeck wrote about that in a book called The Grapes of Wrath. So all the way through the Hoover administration, that was 29 to 33, his philosophy was what they call trickle-down economics. He's going to give money to big businesses because Hoover was a big businessman. So he thinks this is a big business problem. This is not a government helping people problem. This is a big business problem, requires a big business solution. And so he says if we give loans and we give grants and encourage these businesses to voluntarily raise wages, voluntarily hire more people and expand, then eventually this will sort itself out. Well, if he gives a bunch of money to some of these businesses, which they did, and loans, the first thing they did is they paid off all their debt. And they gave their presidents big bonuses. None of that money ever ended up in the hands of Joe factory worker. And so this volunteerism, this plan of Herbert Hoover's was really a kind of a total failure because he just didn't have the foresight to see that in order to start to alleviate some of these problems, you need to put money into the hands of the workers, and that means you need to put those workers to work. And that's where John Maynard Keynes comes around, where he says we need to lower interest rates, encourage people to invest, um, close all the banks, give them a chance to catch themselves up, and start putting people to work. And he said, let's get some of these new programs. Let's put people to work. The WPA, the CCC, the TVA, all these different agencies in the New Deal are just putting people to work. And eventually it was the mobilization of World War II that put people to work in factories. And of course, 13.5 million people are now in the army. That really was the catalyst that came at the end of the Great Depression. So, but we're going to cut it off right there and pick it up in part two.